Hello everybody, welcome. I'm Noah02 and thank you for watching this video. The Warhammer 40k Darktide beta, closed beta, is over now, over the weekend of October here. Got to play it as much as I could. It was a busy weekend for me. But we got some good, we got some bad stuff that I would like to talk about, some fears and worries that I have for the future on the release of this game, and things that this game I thought were incredibly, incredibly cool. Things that were done so well, I thought. Very impressive game overall. Please check the timestamps, especially at the end for like the quick little summary if you're looking for the little synopsis of it all. I'm going to start with the bad stuff because I want to end on a good note because I think this game deserves ending on a good note here. A little foreshadowing overall for this review is, but there were some concerns and worries. So let's start with the simple stuff, right? It was little simple stuff as far as like connection issues, right? Server stability and things like that. It was closed beta and we still got like a month and some change of development time for this game, and so I don't want to go too hard on it, but there were some server problems. um Personally, I didn't really encounter any like game breaking bugs or issues or things like that. I didn't really experience any like rubber banding or weird nuanced server lag connection stuff like teleporting, etc., things like that. I never got dropped from a game like in the middle of a mission, but I did get dropped quite a bit as far as like trying to connect to the servers, as far as like getting into the main lobby, getting dropped out of the lobby, and things like that. It seemed like most of the time, if I ever experienced any sort of like latency server side connection issue thing, it always seemed to happen in like the overworld and this in the little hub area, going to the armory, trying to purchase a weapon, but you couldn't, and things like that. All of it seemed to be in that area. And once you got into the mission, you were fine. I think the game only crashed, like legit crashed one time where like the game just up and closed and was like, "Hey, you crashed. Please give us your information." That only happened once. I'm sure that you all have different experiences with that, but I wanted to like soften that a little bit with like it is closed beta. We all recognize that. They still got some time to fix it, so I don't know how much weight to put on those issues. Uh, It was closed beta, right? So the dev team had control over how many people would be essentially in the servers, right? And so them having connection issues, I don't know if they were concerned about stress testing their servers or not, but hopefully they got some good data as far as like what kind of turnout they should be expecting on their servers and things like that. Because having significant server issues on a closed beta seems a little silly because you should know how much your servers can handle and be prepared for that, right? But I digress a little bit from that. Not a huge deal. None of it was like really game breaking. Didn't really have any like major glugs or bugs or glitches. I didn't get like stuck in anything or fall through the floor. I think there was an instance or two where like I tried to jump in between two things and I like couldn't. It looked like visually I could have and things like that. So like silly nuance things. I got like an hour and a half of gameplay that you can go look at. I think I encountered that a little bit. There was maybe an instance or two of like being in the middle of like fighting a horde and then like people would hit me without animating, it looked like, or like they would just like be prepared to swing, but then I would take damage from them, and I don't know, but it was like all sort of like nuancy. Could have been my internet in the moment, things like that. But I do want to move on to sort of like the bunch of little things, right? Little things that you're all sort of would expect in a closed beta game, at least in this day and era, right? The major issue, though, the thing that, not that it's a major issue, not that the game is like, oh man, this is bad. It was more like think something I'm worried about, something that I've experienced in the past from another PVE cooperative style game. That like this is sort of like a core fundamental of this genre of game. These sort of cooperative PVE style games. There's this core mechanic of like replayability, variety, the little spice of life here. And I actually want to contrast this game, or like put this game in a little spectrum here. So to give an example of what I'm really talking about here. And when it comes to these games, you want a little bit of RNG, some randomness, because otherwise you're just playing through a mission that's stagnant, right? Especially this game that's clearly and obviously designed to play these missions and potentially campaigns over and over and over again, leveling up a character and getting currency to purchase new weapons and guns and stuff like that. The gameplay doesn't also needs to be more than just fun. It needs to be varied, because otherwise it's ends up becoming stale, stagnant. We're talking about going from your typical 20 to 50 hour gameplay and going 100 plus hours of gameplay for people, who enjoying the game. On one side of my spectrum is Aliens Fireteam Elite, relatively ish new cooperative PvE game that came out in the Aliens universe. And other than a challenge card system where players can impose random penalties on themselves and their teammates to sort of add a little bit of spice to completing these missions, there was literally zero in-game mechanics that changed anything about how playing through a mission felt or at all. There was no random horde events. There was no random spawnings of new enemy like special Xeno special enemies. There was no loot to look around and find. No randomness at all. In fact, it was so stagnant, like single player story campaign esque that you literally knew when and where every single major fight happened. The only variety, literally, was those challenge cards, and the system just didn't work. I'm not going to go into any other reasons as to why that game sort of didn't pan out or retain a player population for super long. All games lose player pop over time. It's just that's the way it goes. But other than the challenge card system and like the occasional random like Pouncer Xeno in some random hallway, there was literally no variety as far as how the missions played out. They were all incredibly stagnant. And playing through the campaign the first time, that was fine. That was fun. But when it came to trying to like level up your character, level up your guns, play the game beyond that initial playthrough, that first playthrough, it got incredibly boring, incredibly fast, at least for me. And there might be other contributing factors as well, but for the most part, I want to contrast that game had literally almost no mechanics when it came to adding variables to how the gameplay happened. There's no real personal story happening. In the middle, we would have like Left 4 Dead. There are semi-random horde events. There are semi-random spawn events for special mutations, and there's also random loot, like pipe bombs, random pain pills to find, new weapon upgrades to encounter, and things like that. Going from your pump shotgun to an auto shotgun. Not only did players were rewarded for looting, but also just added a little bit of randomness, a little bit of RNG. You'd play through a mission, and on that mission, there's a section where you would need a pipe bomb. A pipe bomb would be great for this running section, things like that. But maybe you'd play through that mission and not have a pipe bomb. That might feel bad. RNG, that's ruining our gameplay. But at the same time, that RNG creates a problem, and you have to, as a player, improvise a solution, and that ends up creating like a personal story. Every time you play through Left 4 Dead and Left 4 Dead 2, never quite the same. It was always a little bit different, and that's what I'm talking about here as far as the variety. On the other side of the spectrum, we have Back for Blood, which is just like they shoved variables up your nose and in your ears and then laughed at you. Like just nonsense. The corruption cards had all these different variables, different weapons and rarities of weapons with attachments and upgrades and 15 card deck that you get to design yourself and then find extra cards in mission and hives to go into. Like there's just an endless slew of nonsense, of RNG nonsense. And I'm not saying it's good or bad. I just want to create the spectrum of just like a game that has literally no mechanics for veritable gameplay. Left 4 Dead sort of in the middle with a little bit of it, but not too much. And Back for Blood, who like that is the game. Like the game is just pure RNG wrapped around core first person shooter mechanics of like you run, you shoot, you sprint, you jump, and that's about it. So where does Darktide fall on that spectrum? And for me, it sort of fell in between Left 4 Dead and Aliens Fireteam. Not quite as much variety and variables as Left 4 Dead, but a little bit more than Aliens Fireteam Elite. And I'm a little concerned about that. A little worried about it. The good thing is that those mechanics do exist in Darktide, but just not at the lower levels. Get to level 2, get to level 3 difficulty. There are random horde events that seem to be semi-random. There are random spawnings of enemy specials and mutations and things like that. And I feel like there could just be more of it in general. Because when it comes to that stuff, again, it creates that personal story. If you're going to be grinding mission after mission after mission, and sometimes the same map, the same mission, the same objective, just to get XP and gold, I promise you that you really are going to want some of that more variety when it comes to it, because otherwise it literally becomes a grind otherwise, if there's no varied combat and things like that. Because it ends up putting you in situations where you take a fight on a different part of the map that you've never had to take a fight before, or encounter a boss in this area that is sort of sucks for fighting this boss, but you got to make the best of it. And again, all that's going to add to this, like that personal story, that personal experience. It's going to get people going, "Oh man, we played through that sewer mission, and as soon as we dropped into the sewer, the boss spawned, and we were like, no place to stand. When somebody had to like block the boss, and like it just again, like it just adds all that potential excitement, potential storytelling that could be had when it comes to that sort of stuff. Those mechanics exist in the game. I think they could be better. I think they could be more. At the lower difficulty, at level 1, you actually cannot even tell they're there. That's actually sort of the same for Back for Blood. The lower the difficulty, the less RNG, the less variables, the less randomness happening. And I actually think that's sort of a mistake, because I think those things, random enemies, random loot, is like the core, I think, of the sort of like the replayability of these cooperative PvE style games. Darktide has those mechanics. I think they could be better. At like level 2, level 3, those mechanics were sort of more feelable. They happen more often. I don't know exactly how they're working, or what if they're on a solid timer, or if it's like on this mission, well, on this difficulty, there's X amount of random encounters, things like that. Don't know exactly how it works, but they at the very least were feelable when I play through them. So at least they're there, right? And so even on release, maybe the gameplay's a little stale. There's not enough going on. At least it's a matter of like tweaking some numbers, as opposed to adding an entirely new element to the game. Because I think like for Aliens Fireteam, there's no number to tweak to make a horde event happen more often, to make the gameplay more exciting. It's just that element of the game just didn't exist. The other thing about Darktide is the looting. Man, is it boring. There's pretty much nothing to loot. I know there's those yellow crates, and you open them up, inside is a little gift for you, but it's an ammo refill, a grenade refill, resources that you can spend in the overworld in the station, or it's a deployable health kit, or a deployable ammo kit, and that's it. And that's it. And I just felt like for the most part, it's either resources to spend later, which could be nice, but that sort of like is not exciting. It's a part of the grind, or it's a replenishing of the resources that you begin with, as opposed to the finding of things that you don't have, the finding of something that's more rare than what you already got, right? It's just not exciting to loot in Darktide. Even if every single one of those yellow crates was filled with something, even if it be just a bonus magazine of a ammo refill, um, it would still be boring. But in the current state of it, they're not all filled. Some of them are empty, and so it just made looting very unsatisfying, very unexciting. Even when you found loot inside of them to be had, it was just nothing that made you go, "Oh yes, woohoo!" Maybe the occasional med kit, you would go, "Oh yeah, like our team's really unhealthy. We need that. That's cool." But it's just, again, it doesn't have the spice. It's not that exciting, and so I'm a little worried about that. I'm also a little worried that in general, that like the lack of RNG at the lower levels might be felt by the player base. I don't know. Typically in these games, you might think to yourself, we'll just play on level 2, level 3, if level 1 is boring. But people don't like doing that. Some people are scared of that. Some people might think that that's too hard. And I feel like they might get into that rhythm of like, well, Darktide's kind of boring. I only feel comfortable doing level 1, and there's just not a lot going on. And I don't know if there's a way to blend like reduced difficulty, but still like stack up more RNG, more action. That's sort of my primary concern, is that I think when it comes to the potential replayability of Darktide, it might be a little lacking. And we'll just have to see, right? That's my first impression on the closed beta. I can only imagine at level 4, level 5, which I didn't get to. It even gets more crazy, but we'll just have to see. Just keep that in mind, though, that when that game releases, just see what the gameplay is like. See if there's random things happening, because that RNG really does sort of like create that personal story arc of every time you play a mission, it's a little bit different. So that's my main concern for the game right now, is that it might not have the replayability that we're maybe hoping for. It is important to mention that you do get to level up and play through the game with different characters, with different powers and strengths and roles in the team, and that can also add to replayability. But I think Aliens Fireteam sort of showed that like that cannot be the heart and soul of your replayability, because if the gameplay ends up not being super fun or the gameplay gets stale because everything's predictable, leveling up your character is not like the cherry on top. It's like the core of it all, and it becomes a grind. And that could be an issue. And so we'll see how that ends up working out for the most part. And I think really that's really the only major concern, is like some minor technical stuff and maybe like some fundamental replayability issues. But all of that I think could be fixed, because the elements for the replayability are, as far as I can tell, implemented in the game. It might just be a matter of like tweaking the number, changing philosophy of it, maybe. I don't know what the game development, team is thinking about that kind of stuff, right? But even like like I can't remember if I mentioned it already, but like in Vermintide 2, you got like the random patrols and there's random horde events and a variety of specials showing up at random intervals and things like that. That's all, like, I think that's really critical to having a successful cooperative PvE experience, where you expect people to come back and play missions over and over again, level up characters and things like that. So, with that being said, what did Darktide do super well? And you're probably going to hear everyone say this, but the world is cool. The world is so cool. The tone, the environments, the scale of it. You look up and you see off in the distance lights and grungy, dingy world. I'm not a lore guy. This is actually the very first 40k, like Warhammer 40k game that I've ever played. I don't know the lore. I don't know the Easter eggs. I don't know how much of a love letter this is to all of the well-established fan base out there for this world and genre. But I felt like I got it. I felt like I understood very quickly what I was stepping into. This like religious, zealot, fanatical, industrial world is all new to me, and it was really, really awesome. And I think if you don't know anything about Warhammer, and you're like, I don't know, I'm not a Warhammer person, I don't know if I'll get it. Oh, you will. And you're going to go, wow, this is crazy. And if you are super into Warhammer 40k, to me it feels like I feel like this, I hope it does justice for you guys, because to me it felt like it would. It felt like a love letter to those who love the universe, love the world building. I was very impressed with like the character creation, where you had to like choose your home planet and choose your background and then choose your defining moment and then choose why you're in prison. And I was like, well, there's a lot more like narrative just to the character creation in itself. And I think for fans of the world and genre and people who read the books, I think that'll all be appreciated in some way or another. The maps were super cool. Even though my computer is a little old, I meet the minimum requirements for Darktide. But with that being said, the game actually ran really smoothly for me. Even though the game may not have been the prettiest, it was lookable. I mean, I played video games in the 90s, so like graphics are not a big deal to me in general. The eyebrows are laughable during character creation on my lowest settings, but just overall the game looked really nice. The map design seemed really cool. A little nitpick is that there were some parts of the map where you just never go to. They're like there's actually quite a bit of empty space in these maps, and overall it still adds to the tone of like where you are and how the scale of it all and things like that. And I would love, maybe like for some reason, for like the looting system can be a potentially good part of like getting players to different parts of the map to find extra loot, and then when they're over there that spends extra time, and that means an extra horde event has triggered because they spent more time dilly-dallying in this area. And then I just think there's a lot of potential here as far as the map design goes. We all know it's going to be linear in the long run, but sometimes it didn't feel like it. And what was really most impressive to me, as far as how big and sort of grand these maps ended up sort of like looking and feeling and things like that, and that there was some like areas that felt like a playground, but a lot of times you didn't utilize it because you just got to keep going because there wasn't enough random combat happening. It just felt like there was a lot of potential to be had there. Oh yeah, and what I was most impressed with though is that I almost never got lost. Even right from the start, I almost never got lost. I think one time I got lost with the team. Nobody knew where to go, but a couple minutes later, we found the path and we were on the way. So as far as like what felt like rather intricately designed maps, they never needed to compromise. Like, when it comes to map design like this, there are tricks that designers and map designers can do to guide players on the right path. I couldn't tell what they were, but somehow I naturally, instinctively, as I played the game, just knew where to go. And that might not be the same to people who aren't familiar with these types of games or get lost a lot of times in video games naturally. Maybe it's because I've played thousands and thousands of hours of PvE style games like this, but I never got lost, and I couldn't even tell like how they were guiding me. Like I mean, if I sat down and really thought about it, but for the most part, they never needed to compromise their aesthetic, their tone, for like for like for game design as far as like guiding players to the correct place. So it felt really cool, and the map was amazing. The environments were super cool, going from like I don't know, like places of living into weird hobbled places of industry into places of religious religious culture, and it was just a really cool environment to be in, coupled with like the random quotes on the loading screens that like talked about the scripture dogma of our zealot fanatical populace that we're playing as and living in. It was awesome. Like everything in that tone was actually incredible. Like I would say like pretty much perfect. Like as perfect as you can ever hope as far as like telling a story and giving a feeling and setting a tone and things like that was just truly cool. Truly truly cool. And I think another thing is this the core gameplay. It was great. I loved it. I think I had some friends who played Vermintide and things like that, and I was like, oh, I got into the closed beta for Darktide, and they're like, oh yeah, like those games have always had really good melee combat and things like that. And I gotta say, I actually really enjoyed it. There's like a simple beauty, I think, a like sort of like easy to understand, hard to master sort of feel. Just from like the swinging of your weapon to the blocking, and then like the dashes that you can do when you're like strafing left to right or backwards, coupled with like the variety of like choosing a different weapon would lead to you having a different swing style and different. This one's better at single targets and this one's better at cleaving, and like it was pretty simple to understand how to swing your weapon, how to block, how to activate your special abilities, how to dodge and things like that, but felt like there's a lot of potential depth to mastering all of that movement and its nuanced uses and variety of different situations and things like that. So it felt cool from like doing the dodges into a power slide into sprint jumping and things like that. It felt nice. Felt really awesome. Shooting the guns felt fine as well for the most part. The laser gun felt a little janky to shoot, but I'm not super worried about it. Overall, the gameplay was fun. It was super fun, and I think for the most part that's about it. Like the world was awesome, and the gameplay was fun. And I would love to see just more content. You know, it was closed beta, so I assume limited content. Would love to see more of it, and I assume they got more of it and things like that. Would love to see like a campaign story, in depth, like just learning, going through some sort of story or learning more about the world and things like that. The more lore I can get. I mean, I'm not really a lore guy, but when it comes to like games like this, I love the little tidbits, the character conversations, things like that. When it came to all that sort of details, it was freaking sweet. It was super cool. I enjoyed it a lot, actually. Actually, ooh, I forgot to talk about one more sort of like bad thing. I love the character, good or bad. I actually really love the idea of character progression, leveling up your characters. I don't know how much depth there is going to be. It's because I don't know how much depth there's going to be in like the weapons and variety of gear and things like that. So I feel like there maybe could have been more, but again, there might be a simple beauty in how simple like leveling up your character was, having like just the simple lines of development as far as like you choose one of these 3 abilities per level. I heard that there was possibly an element of like you can take 2 classes and combine them together. So I haven't seen if that's the case, I haven't seen all of the potential depth that character creation could have. But overall, there were some of the characters where I was like, "Oh man, like this would be really cool to play and figure out." And I think there's just a lot of potential there as far as having different classes that feel different, play different, uh, cater to a different play style. Players who might look at a class and go, "Oh, this makes sense to me." A lot of potential there as far as that all working out in the long run. I think they have the foundation for it. But if it doesn't quite end up working out, that they have the ability to tweak those numbers, change those things, add and take away stuff and things like that. So overall, the world was awesome. The gameplay was awesome. I really enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to its release. I'm most likely going to get it on its release and things like that. That's how much I really liked it. And we'll just have to see how the replayability ends up going in the long run and things like that. I think there's still potential that the mechanics are there, but I don't think they're fully fleshed out or the numbers are quite correct. And I think the only true like this was bad about it, this game was the looting. Was the looting. The looting was pretty crappy. But other than that, everything was cool. Like really cool. I'm quite excited for it. Let me know what you guys think. Anything I missed, anything I skipped over maybe. But overall, I really happy with the experience. Had a lot of fun with it, and I look forward to playing it in the future. And thank you guys. I guess I'll see you guys in the future as well.